Welcome to episode 47 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alistair Meldrum.
And myself, Jane Bodden.
How are we today, Jane?
Well, not too bad, actually.
Our guest this week is James Piper, and I'm not going to say anything about James until the end, and we're going to fill you all in who if you've not heard already who James Piper is, but quite an inspirational gentleman. So, time for your news now, Jane.
Is it time for my news? Right. Okay. Well, the first news I've got is, which I think is quite funny. It's councils in England should get revised guidance on middle class fly tipping. So basically, what this is, I mean, you see it on like Facebook. It's not just England, to be honest. It's everywhere where you see people say, "Oh, I've left you out a little chair and some." And if anybody can use these vegetables, or if anybody could use this, I don't know, chair or table or whatever, come along and get it. And apparently, that's now been taken as fly tipping. Apparently, some councils have taken an overzealous approach to fining people who leave items outside their home for neighbours to collect for free. Do you not think that's a bit sad, really? I mean, I guess it depends how long you're going to leave it out for. I mean, if you're leaving it out for weeks and weeks, then fair enough. But, we're in this thing of reuse and, trying to get people to reuse what we don't want. So what's wrong with that? I mean, it's different if somebody's chucked out a sofa that's kind of fallen to bits and sits there for ages. But no, if you've got something you just think somebody else might want, is there anything wrong with that?
It does seem a bit overzealous, but I suppose it was the title that triggered me slightly, that middle class fly tipping, as in middle class people are allowed to fly tip, but nobody else is. That was a bit.
Posh people are all right.
But I suppose it makes it's the local government and social care ombudsman that has decided there's a bit of an issue here. But I suppose the way the council sort it out is have a bit of a clear policy in place. If somebody is putting stuff out in the street, that's okay for a small number of days. If it's still there and it's not taken away, then, effectively it probably is fly tipping. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like somebody gave this woman a £500 fixed penalty notice for fly tipping when she'd left her IKEA cabinet outside her home for people to take, to say, there we go. And then there's a picture of like this thing being all free, and saying, please take these items.
The other side of that coin is I've got a back lane where people do the same, and they leave stuff and they leave it there for months and months and months.
Well, yeah, that's different.
And to me, that should be tackled. The other hot news that was out there just released this week was there was an investigation done into where the soft plastic. So when you go into the supermarket, you can recycle your soft plastic, and somebody did an investigation, put a few trackers on it, and they discovered that a lot of this material is ending up in incineration rather than recycling. So it was an organisation called Everyday Plastics, a guy called Daniel Webb. Again, we'll put the link up, and it just strikes me as really strange. Why would supermarkets pay send stuff for incineration that should really be recycled? And I think it's down to the fact that there's very few facilities in the UK that will actually recycle soft plastic.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's back to this thing of why recycle if we've not got a market, we've not got a product and so on. But it gives newspapers like the Daily Mail, etc., perfect ammunition to say the waste industry is not doing its job right, or in this case, the supermarkets aren't doing their job right.
Yeah, it just seems a shame, doesn't it? I mean, everybody's saying collect plastic, collect this, collect that. So you've got everywhere to put your plastic bits and pieces, and then it's not going anywhere. It's not going where you think it's going to go.
Yeah.
Unless the supermarkets don't know, unless they're giving it in good faith. Or am I being a bit cynical?
They should know, because they're backloading it. Most of the supermarkets work by backloading. Right. So all the cardboard, all the plastic wrap that they're getting into the supermarket, they backload at their distribution centres. And that's where that soft plastic goes. So most of these distribution sites have got pretty big recycling facilities on them. So they will
Mm,
know where it's going.
okay.
But I think it's just clearly there's not a market for there's not an outlet for the soft plastic.
Well, that's the trouble, isn't it? That's the problem with anything, isn't it?
I wa-
You can recycle anything, but you need to be able
I
to
wa-
treat
one of
it.
our I did find that one via one of our avid listeners who messaged me and said, "Have you seen this yet? Have you seen this yet?" So thank you very much to that particular listener for quite like getting things like that have maybe not crossed our radar. So thank you.
Yeah, that's good. The other one I've got here is kind of, I suppose, it, back to sort of fly tipping in a way. And it's the title is I saw at M90 Commerce Park near Lathalmond untouched. And basically it's saying there's a 30-foot high rubbish dump at Lathalmond contains around 7,000 tons of old carpets and plasterboard. And you see the picture and it's just, oh, it looks awful. But it looks like it's 7,000 tons and it looks like it's been there for about 10 years. And what they're saying is that there's a big wrangle going on between SEPA and the site owners about who's supposed to be cleaning it up and everything. So all this waste is staying there. And then because it's there, others think, oh yeah, it's okay to dump my stuff there as well. And it's just, it's how, if it's been there for 10 years, how do we, how do we get rid of it? Why is there such a wrangling between, authorities? Is it money? Is it an orphan
No,
site? Is
it'll
it
be money. No,
owned?
nobody's got the money to pay for it.
So it just
So
sits there.
it'll go round in circles until somebody agrees they're paying for it. But it does seem ridiculous. It's been there for 10 years.
Yeah, and you're finding Mrs. McDonald for leaving out her IKEA cabinet or whatever.
That was in England and Wales, Jane.
But it's
No, exactly. No, I agree. I agree.
it just seems a bit, perhaps we just haven't quite got the balance right in some areas.
Yeah. Well, I was when we were preparing for this. I was thinking I was going to have a wee bit of a rant today about something, but something else popped into my notice that sort of links in quite neatly. So SEPA has issued a bit of a survey to waste operators about how well commercial waste producers are complying with the current regulations. So this goes back to Waste Scotland Regs 2012, and this is to do with food waste. If you produce more than 5 kilograms of food waste, you must have a separate collection, and you must separately collect glass, metals, plastic, paper, and card. So SEPA is looking for feedback from the waste industry. I did go in and have a nosy. I pretended that I was a waste contractor to try and get into the survey. But what was really disappointing to me was the actual survey doesn't detail the legislation that they're checking that companies are applying with. So it's just quite vague in terms of what the companies are doing. I thought it would have detailed this is what companies should be complying with, and then here's the questionnaire. So I thought it was fairly. I wasn't hugely impressed with it, to be honest. And then the other side of the coin is, are they also going to go and do? So this is a survey targeted at the waste industry. Are they actually going to do a similar survey on the waste producers and ask them if they're complying with the regulations?
Now that would be interesting.
It was.
Especially,
It was actually. You go. Sorry.
I was going to say, especially as they probably don't know what the regulations are in the first place.
Well, that's what got me about the thing, that there are so many people that probably don't know what the Waste Scotland regulations actually say. I went on and I did go back on and check. I knew what they said. So if you're going to do a survey on something, you should really be given a highlight of what it is they're meant to be complying with, I would think. But it was a bit nostalgic when I went through the Waste Scotland Regs 2012, because that's where the test is detailed for whether waste is biodegradable for the landfill ban that's coming in 2025. And this is the test that none of the labs can actually perform yet. So we've got this ban looming, and we've got a test detailed in legislation that we don't actually know if this test is going to work. So watch this space for another podcast. But the related link to that was my local restaurant, which I have mentioned before, I was by it the other night, and there are now 7 Eurobins which are overflowing with cardboard and plastic hanging out of them. And guess how many are recycling out of the 7?
Oh, it must be at least 5, surely.
Well, 5 are residual.
Oh, right. Oh,
2 are
really?
recycling.
Oh, really? All
2 are
right. You would
recycling.
like to think it's the other way around, wouldn't you? Is there any
Well, this is
food waste
this is
bins?
the food waste bin is a tiny bin, and this place has probably got about 200 covers.
Oh,
So the food bin goes out once a week, and it's a tiny bin. So I would think most of that residual waste is food waste. Quite a bit of it's cardboard, plastic, because it's they're a catering establishment, they're the pub or a restaurant. Most of their supplies are coming in packaging. I would think like you, Jane, it should be 7. Five recycling and 2 residual. And that's just the point. This is the bit that SEPA's trying to say our operators complying. But we need to get that back to the producers. It's the usual story. What's the point in having legislation if we're not going to enforce it?
well, yeah, that's right. Or you enforce it on, the middle
And
class
and
English people leaving their things out.
the bins out.
Yeah.
But I suppose the way Scotland regs are an interesting one, because it's meant to be enforced by environmental health, because they're carrying out the food inspections of these premises, and then if they're having problems with it, they're then meant to pass it on to SEPA. But if you look at it in terms of how many enforcement actions have been taken out of any of these premises since the regs came in, and I think the answer is 0, unless somebody can prove me wrong.
There's a challenge for all our listeners there.
No, absolutely.
So the other thing we were looking at as well is we've got International E-Waste Day on the 14th of October.
This one triggered me as well earlier, Jane.
Well, yes. So, raising awareness of need to recycle electronics and all this sort of stuff. So we had it last year, and we had loads and loads of electronics and stuff that people brought, and I found more in my attic. But there's also this thing about, there is also a link to the UK vaping industry and what they were saying as well. And it was there was a bit of a disproportionate thing about it. So it's time to take vaping responsibly. We have lots in store for this year event, which launches in line with International Waste Day. This is the UK vaping industry saying this. They're going to have a sustainable vaping week. I mean, is that not just like a contradiction in terms of, have you heard one?
I think it's a total contradiction. And if you want to follow what's going on and giving them a hard time, is Scott Butler, who was on episode 15. He regularly posts stuff and regularly challenges them. And he was challenging him about, did you know you can get a vape that you can do online betting on now, and you can watch videos on the vape?
No way.
Why you would want to do that, I have no clue, but that's what they're now introducing. So a disposable vape that you can watch a little film or do some online betting on it or whatever. Which just seems madness. Seems madness.
I think Scott put up a link on LinkedIn as well to their research, which came out in March this year, where it says over 90% of vape producers and retailers in the UK are still failing to meet environmental regulations. Yeah. And it's like vape drop-off points were available in 33% of 57 specialist vape retailers.
That's maybe instead of celebrating e-waste day, they should maybe actually start complying with the regulations. Well, that should maybe be their promise for e-waste day.
Yeah.
You could live in anyway. We as an Albion are having a bit of a collection, and once we've got a collection of people's cables and waste electrical, we will contact our pals at CCL. I'm sure Bruce McLean will organise us a little collection. I was going to tag him with an episode number, but I can't actually remember what an episode. But we did do an episode with Bruce.
We are on 47 now, Alistair.
I know.
But I do think, I think last year we had loads of phones and stuff, didn't we? And I actually found an old telly in my attic. One of those like big proper.
Oh, the cathode ray tube ones.
Yeah.
Flipping egg, Jane.
I know.
Does it still work?
I don't know. It's right in the corner of the attic. I might keep
You need
it.
to,
Do you know? It could
you
be.
need to try it.
Well, I could sell
You
it
need,
as a kind of like an antique.
you need to test it out. You need to test it out.
There's no aerial, is there anymore?
I suppose so. I suppose so.
So anyway, what else have we got? We've got Resourcing Scotland is fast approaching, 14th of November 2024. So that's going to be good actually, because we've got a lot of organisations coming together to provide what the industry wants rather than what people think the industry wants. So as CIWM, Chartered Institute of Waste Management, RMAS, which I always forget.
Resource Management Association Scotland. I was going to wait and see how many you got right, Jane.
We've got CISA, Scottish Environmental Services Association. We've got REA, the
Renewable Energy Association, which
and
covers composting and anaerobic digestion.
and WMN,
Yeah.
Waste
Waste
Management
Managers
Network. Yes.
which is the local authorities.
Yes.
There you go, Jane. You almost passed. That should have been a quiz for Jane, actually. We should have done that as a quiz.
How many acronyms can you know? So we, along with Albert and along with RMAS, we've sponsored 20 free places for young people. So we want people to come, look at the waste industry and think there's so many different careers available. So come along for free.
I think all the places are, I think they're all taken, all the free places, and I think it's very close to being a sellout, the whole event. So,
excellent!
And the other big news is myself and Simon Glenn, episode 7 and episode 28. We are opening the whole event. So why they've asked me, Simon, I'm not quite sure. So I've had the pleasure of delving into Scotland's waste stats for the last few weeks, and my head is nipping with the various stats. I might start rhyming off various stats at the next episodes, but and also in the afternoon we are doing a rubbish talk session with some of these younger people, and they're actually going to be interviewing myself. I'm not quite sure how the format's going to work.
I was going to say, you're leaving me out of this. I think.
No, you have been left out of it because the plan's not actually my plan. There's a bit of a committee doing the dealing, and they're planning it, and I'm just doing what I'm told.
Yeah,
for a change. So that's what's happening there.
Yeah.
So it's fast approaching.
Yeah. So looking forward to that. Actually, that'll be good. What else have we got? We've got a lot of rubbish talk on social media still. New stuff on social media. So we're going to shift all the rubbish talk posts over from the Albion feeds. So please give us a follow, because we want as many followers as possible to join in, and give us some content for future podcasts.
This is because we've set up specific rubbish talk social media feeds rather than at the moment we've been promoting it on the Albion feed. So we're gradually shifting stuff across. So please share as appropriate. And we have actually just also set up a rubbish talk Strava club. So I know you're always out on a bike, yours, Jane.
Oh, I haven't been for a while.
You could become the top cyclist in the Strava club. So we'll get ourselves organised and share the link for that. So all these people that think health and well-being and getting out for a walk or getting out for a run or a cycle, you can access the podcast from the Rubbish Talk Strava feed.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Quite cool.
And then I had a wee day out of the office last week. I was away up at Port Soy seeing Charles Gray, who operates a company called Gray Recycling. And I'll tell you, he's one of these sort of really inspirational businesses that just plugs away in the background and just gets it done, minimum fuss. So what they do is they take in food waste, they compost it in an in-vessel system, they apply that to the land, they then grow barley, which goes into the distillery industry, and they grow seed potatoes, and they export seed potatoes almost halfway around the world. In terms of their export markets are huge. And he was showing me I actually hardly saw the waste facility. I saw more of his potato machine that will automatically sort potatoes into different sizes, different they grade them by the number of buds they've got, or the bud. I don't know what the proper terminology is. And this machine takes 70 different photographs of the potato as it's rotating, so they know the size and weight, and then they package them up into different types. So absolutely incredible. Unfortunately, it wasn't working. It was about 2 weeks away from being in production, but incredible facility. But when I was there, he was telling me all about Peaky Blinders, because Peaky Blinders was filmed in Portsoy, and I managed to go and take a wee. There's a wall where I believe I'm not a follower, but I believe one of the main characters was killed off in a explosion in Portsoy. So there's a memorial wall to the Peaky Blinders. So we did share that on social media. But actually, if you look on Street View and go down to the harbour at Portsoy, you can actually see this wall all for yourself.
Right, okay. Peaky Blinders too violent for me, so it's not surprising they'll get murdered at some point or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we are rapidly approaching our episode 50, aren't we? I mean, we're on 47 now. We've only got a few more weeks.
Should we retire, Jane? We could maybe retire at 50.
No, we've got plenty of chit chat. We got, I'm working on my professional chit chat career. So, and I think we wanted to do something a little bit different, don't we, Alistair? We were looking to see whether we could persuade one of our loyal, avid listeners to come on and, have a bit of a chat with us.
Record the intro.
Yeah, record the introduction. I don't quite know. You could record whatever you want, really. Well, providing Mia, our producer, agrees. But yeah, that'd be quite good.
We've got to run it by Mia, but the idea is, if you are interested in doing it, drop us a little note on hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk, and we will get back to you, and we'll give you a wee link, and we'll do a wee recording. So
yeah, any ideas you've got, great.
Just to be a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's us. Apart from the main part of the podcast,
the main event.
Absolutely. So I never mentioned James that much at the start. So James Piper is co-host of Talking Rubbish podcast. So I believe either James or herself have committed a bit of adultery, as in appearing in somebody else's podcast. So I'm not sure if it's us that's committed that or him that's committed it. But James has started his podcast fairly recently. He managed, much to my disgust, to get into the Guardian as the top environmental podcast out there. So
yeah, we're dead jealous of that. So if anybody can help us, yeah.
I'm a bit jealous of his success, but never mind. He is co-owner of Ecosurety. He's chair of City to Sea, and he's non-executive director of a number of businesses. And he's also written a book. He's also written the Rubbish book, which I am currently halfway through. And I'll mention later on, I've got about 7 books in the go at the moment, and I've managed to finish none of them. But we had a good long chat with James. He gave a very good description about extended producer responsibility, and myself and Jane have talked about that before, but his explanation I thought was excellent. And he did mention his secret hobby. So if you want to know what James's secret hobby is, you need to listen in, which it came as a bit of a surprise to me, I think.
Well, it came as a bit of a surprise to me, especially the extent of his secret hobby, which,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think before we pass over to James, I think in terms of our podcast, I would suggest there's a bit of friendly rivalry, but he's managed to get into the Guardian and we've not. But I think we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to educate the public about the complexity of the waste industry. We're doing it slightly differently in terms of interviews. He's doing it more in terms of talking about technical subjects. So certainly well worth a listen to Talking Rubbish, and it's probably going to confuse the life out of me in future about what our name is. The two names are too similar. So over to myself, James, and Jane.
Hi, James, and how are you? Welcome to Rubbish Talk. How's it going with you?
Hi, Jane. Yeah, very good. Thank you. It's lovely to be on.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you, especially as we can now see you and not just hear you from your Talking Rubbish podcast.
Oh, see, now
So
that's going to
anyway,
happen throughout the episode, isn't it?
yeah, well, like we say, we're trying to achieve the same thing. Our first question is always about, can you tell us who you currently work for, and a bit of background. But this is kind of a background about you and how you and where you are with it so far.
Okay. Well, it's actually a really complicated answer, who I work for. So I'll give you you're going to ask me my background, aren't you? So I'll just sort of like give you a bit of a steer on where I am. But basically, I'm currently the non-exec director for Ecosurety, which is a packaging compliance scheme. So we work in producer responsibility and EPR, which I know you've had people on talking about. I can go into more details about that if you're interested. And I'm also the chair of a charity in Bristol called City to Sea, trustee of a housing association, and also a non-exec director for OPRL, who, if listeners aren't familiar with them, they do the labels on all our packaging that says recycle or don't recycle. So I've sort of got lots of organizations in the recycling space that I'm working with. And as you mentioned, I recently started a podcast called Talking Rubbish. And I just thought it'd be funny. Well, when we were talking to Alistair, we thought it'd be quite fun to come on the podcast, and maybe I could pretend I've dialed into the wrong one.
Well, what I want to know, James, is how long it took you to get that name, Talking Rubbish, and how much thought went into it.
Well, that is a great question. It's actually quite an interesting question because I also wrote a book called The Rubbish Book, which was a COVID project. I actually wrote that and my wife illustrated it. So we had this really cool project that we did together to educate people about recycling. And when this is going to be such a long-winded way of answering how I came up with the name, but when I was traveling with my wife, we were talking about how we could keep the book up to date, and I planned to do a website. I thought I can't really do a website; it's going to take ages, so I'll do a podcast instead. So about 3 years ago, I think I decided a podcast would be a good thing to do. I trademarked the Rubbish Podcast as a companion to the Rubbish Book, and then when I got back, I sort of forgot that I'd said I was going to do a podcast, and then remembered a couple of months ago, and my wife turned to me and said, I think Talking Rubbish is a better name than the Rubbish Podcast. So that's how it happened. And I trademarked that and then realised there was also Rubbish Talk.
There you go. There you
Yeah,
go.
so you've got lots of different strings to your bow, haven't you, really? You must be quite busy with all your directors and non-directorships of everything that you're working with.
Very busy, and actually more busy than I have suggested, because I've got a couple of projects that I'm not really talking about yet that are quite exciting that we'll be announcing soon. But so I'm doing quite a few different things. I'm doing a bit of work at the moment in like the refill and reuse space, which is really interesting, trying to look at that as opposed to just recycling. And I'm also doing a project around developing a building as well in Bristol. So I've got loads going on at the moment.
Wow, I take it that's where you live in Bristol then.
I live in Bristol, yeah, quite far away from you guys.
Yeah, but waste is universal. Can I
Absolutely.
ask you a question? When you said you were traveling with your wife, does that
Yes.
mean you were looking at all sorts of different waste bins while you were traveling and taking all sorts of photos? Because we've had this discussion with me and Alistair about every time we go on holiday, there's always that, right, where's the waste going? What's it doing? Where's that bin? What's that bin do? Where does it go?
Of
Why is
course.
it different to, yeah.
My camera roll is half very nice pictures of things that we should be taking photos of, and very nice pictures of bins. It's like half and half, I'd say. And yeah, I did calculate how many photos I took while traveling. It was something like 40,000 or something, and I'd imagine quite a fair proportion of bins and waste and recycling, because I just saw so many just awful messages. Like some countries, they say things like, I was in an airport where it said dry mix recycling, and you just think, well, I know what that means.
Yeah.
Looking in this bin, no one knows what this means who's in this airport. And it's a very weird way of communicating. So yeah, I was CEO of Ecosurety between 2015 and 2021, I think. And then my wife and I decided to go traveling. So I gave up the job as CEO, gave it to someone else, and then I've come back as a non-exec director. So we spent 16 months going all around the world, during COVID, which was a bit weird. And there's another book in there, I think, about traveling during COVID. But yeah, that's what we did for about a year and a half.
That sounds pretty amazing.
It was very good, yes.
I must confess, James, I'm only about halfway through your book. I seem to have this habit these days of starting books and never quite finishing them. So I've probably got about 6 or 7 books I've started and I've not actually got to the end of them. And then you're left with a dilemma as to which one you really want to finish. But one of the things I really liked is you introduced the book about something I use quite often in courses. I can't remember how you worded it, but it's very much anything can be recycled. It's just whether it's economically viable or sensible to do so. And I think that point is often lost in a lot of the public, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And don't worry about being halfway through the book, because I've read it plenty of times. I've read it enough for everyone. But I did, when I wrote it, I said I'm writing a book to put near your recycling bin, and the publishers didn't really like that. I sort of imagined it as a book that you would have near the bin, and then you would sort of flick to whatever section you wanted to, you were throwing away some polystyrene or something, as per your last week's episode, and you were throwing away polystyrene and you were like, oh, I'm not quite sure, and you'd flick to the right page in the book. I just had this kind of vision that that's what it would be. And then when you say to the publishers, can we have a book that just lives by people's bins, they don't really like it. It's like saying, can I have a book that lives in the toilet? Publishers don't want to advertise that. But yeah, so it was, remember that first line very well. So opening with, everything can be recycled. It's just whether it's viable, economically viable to do so. And that is just so true. And for me, the passion I have in all the work I do for getting consumers to put things in the right bin comes down to, let's make it as economically viable as we can for recyclers to then turn it into something. And for that to work, it has to be clean and it has to be what they're looking for. And so the opportunity to write a book about that and also do a podcast about that is just amazing.
Very much what we were trying to do, James. Very much what we were trying. Yeah, it's maybe not a book you need. It's maybe an app you need. You maybe need the
Rubber Chat. Yeah.
Well, we've got that My Bins app we've got with local authorities, and it's very much allowing people to type in a product and then it identifies which bin it goes into. The challenge with that is every local authority in the UK's got slightly different systems. It is quite hard, but being able to type in a product and go to the page in your book which gives the main recommendations might be a way forward there.
Yeah, that would be great.
Could be some sort of synergy there. We could have a link which goes from yeah, you press a link in there, it goes to James's book, and then it goes into the bin.
Maybe we just have like a little speaker attached to the bin, and then it just plays our respective podcasts. So as someone scans the barcode, they just hear you, Alistair, say, that's polystyrene, don't put it in here.
Yeah, that's right. That's 98% air.
Anyway, we're almost having a strategy meeting about our businesses here, James. So you mentioned your career today. What actually brought you into the world of waste management? Were you like most people in the waste sector that you fell in by accident, or did you plan it?
A little bit of both, I would say. I studied biology at university, and I had a bit of a passion I had a big passion for like the world, the planet, the oceans. I've taken up a huge amount of scuba diving while traveling, so I've spent a lot of time in the oceans. And, wildlife and nature is a big part of kind of what I'm excited by. I grew up on David Attenborough documentaries. So I want to do something that's going to be good for the planet. I got my biology degree with that in mind from Exeter, decided I was going to move to Bristol, and got a job that I'll probably save for when Jane asked me what my worst job was. But I got a job. And then I moved to a different job, and I moved to Ecosurety. It was called Budget Pack back then. So we had a rebrand in sort of, I think it was 2013. So when I joined, it was called Budget Pack. And I joined in 2009, essentially as a graduate. I'd had this one job for 10 months before it. And just worked my way up. But as I say, became CEO in 2015, helped grow the organization, turn it into ultimately what it is today, which is a very different company to when I started. And over that time, have become just so passionate about recycling and specifically helping. I just think we are really bad at communicating recycling. I think we forget to tell the stories behind waste. And like if I say to people, don't recycle a Pyrex jug, for example, you might remember that, you might not. But if you start talking about like the melting point of cookware and you give the why and the story behind it, that's the bit people remember. So I just realized that telling stories was going to be really important, and telling stories about waste was really important. And I seemed to enjoy that, and people seem to enjoy hearing me tell stories. So I just sort of, I have turned that into what I do with my work with OPRL, City to Sea, Ecosurety. They all have a common thread, which is helping consumers to recycle better and really understanding how the recycling industry works, so that I can turn what is quite complicated into hopefully quite simple stories.
I think that mirrors the reason why we set up this podcast. Was really that probably my frustration that the waste industry is very good at talking to the waste industry, but they're not very good at talking to the big bad world out there. And I was listening to one of your episodes the other day, and it was talking about where should receipts, till receipts go? Should it be paper waste? Should it not be paper waste? And I knew that, but I would guarantee a lot of your listeners had no clue that you can't recycle them because the material's heat treated.
That's right. And what did we say on the back? I think we said something like there was a survey done and 95% of people thought receipts were recyclable. And so we know that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of think paper's paper, don't you? But yeah, there's different.
And it's the example you gave with the Pyrex dish, the number of people you do a course and they're like, Pyrex is glass, everything can be recycled, and it's heat treated glass that doesn't recycle in the same way as a glass bottle does. So there's all these intricacies. You've got plenty of information for your podcast for many, many episodes, I think.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I keep thinking I'm going to run out soon, but I keep having ideas.
I don't think you are.
But I'm literally in the office and I'm just looking at some blue tack and I'm thinking that's going to be an episode. What can blue tack be recycled? That's a good one, isn't it? So literally, as I'm walking my day-to-day life, I mean, I said it on episode 1. I was just walking in and I saw some photographs and I was like, oh, can those be recycled? And it just gets you thinking. Suddenly, you're noticing everything as you go walking around. And you think, oh, I should include that. So yeah, it's good fun.
It's when people say to you, and can they be recycled? And you're thinking, I should know that, but I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What's the official answer?
Yeah, that's right. Does it matter whether I'm in East Ayrshire or South Ayrshire or Renfrewshire or down in Bristol?
So out of these various jobs you've had, or the main job you've had, any particular favourite roles or periods or projects you've had where something really stood out that you thought, oh, I'd love to be doing that again, and just
yeah. I guess, I'd have to say Ecosurety, because that's been my big career, right? So I joined as a graduate, became CEO, became a shareholder in 2020. So that's given me it's given me so much opportunity, and it's been an amazing journey. And to grow that company from, I was employee number 7, we're now up at about 85 people. So it's a significant growth over quite a short period of time, really. And I'm super proud of that. And I'm proud of the clients we've got and the work that we're doing. In terms of a specific project, when I decided I was going to go traveling, which had been kind of a long-term plan, and I'd been talking to the business about it for quite a while, it wasn't a shock to anyone. So when I had decided to do that, I gave a lot of notice, I think it was probably technically 2 years notice, and just said, look, this is the day I want to go. And ultimately that got shifted a little bit because of COVID as well. So we recruited a new CEO in, Will, who's my replacement, who's here, and I got 6 months with him. And because I wasn't CEO, I took on more of an innovation role over that last year or so. So really going and finding projects to work on that we could develop into things that would be really good for our members, basically. And there were 2 main projects I worked on in that space. So one is called Podback, which is a coffee pod recycling scheme, which your listeners might be familiar with. So that was a scheme where Nestle, JDE, and I'm going to forget their name and I'm going to get told off. But anyway, let's hope they're not listening. Coffee pod manufacturers got together, Tassimo, I think. But I think, anyway, they got together and they said, we want to create this scheme. And they really needed that scheme to be pre-competitive. They needed it to not be something that one of them was setting up. It was for the whole industry. And that was really exciting for me because I love industry-wide projects. I hate we're developing a project for one client, which no one else gets to use. That's kind of crazy, right? So I'm all for everyone getting together and doing something amazing. And so I helped design that scheme. I helped design the finances of that scheme, how it was all going to work, where we were going to send the pods for recycling, all that kind of stuff. So I got to be a key role in that organisation and that development, and that's something that Ecosurety then took on to carry on supporting, and ultimately we've handed it over to a team at Podback. But very, very involved in the early stages. And then we had another project in a similar vein called, which again your listeners might be familiar with, called the Flexible Plastics Fund, which was a really great project taking on sort of that ideology of working as a group and getting together 5 of the biggest brands in this space. So we worked with Nestle, Pepsi, Unilever, Mondelez, and Mars. Okay, Nestle, Unilever, Mars, Mondelez, and Pepsi. So they all obviously, produce flexible plastic amongst other things for their chocolate wrappers and crisp packets. And we said to them, look, if we put a pot of money together, anytime anyone proves that flexible plastic has been recycled, we could allow them to claim from this pot of money. So they had to prove that flexible plastic had been recycled. It had to go through quite a strict audit chain, or a very strict audit chain, to prove that it had been recycled. And then the recycler could claim some money from the pot. And that gave, because going back to that first line of the book, economics is key to recycling. And the trouble with flexible plastic is it's really lightweight and it's hard to make money out of, because ultimately you have to pick it. You have to have a pick line to pick out the flexible plastic you want. You have to recycle it. And when you get to the end of it, it's just worth what a ton of plastic is worth. And if that's not very much, or that's fluctuated, then you're not going to justify putting the investment in to get flexible plastic recycling happening. So by having this pot of money, it gave the recyclers confidence that they could invest. So that was the idea. Ultimately, it's ended up growing way beyond my wildest dreams into Flex Collect, which is a plastic collection from the home. So we now have a load of households, I can't remember the exact number, but a huge quantity of households that have curbside flexible plastic collections. And again, that's through this fund where we help support that and get that to happen. So those, for me, Podback and Flexible Plastic Fund, are 2 projects that I'm super proud of.
Is that commingled collection streams, or is it collected as a sort of package?
No, it's collected separately. So the way it works is a household signs up. So they're informed that they're part of this trial. They would sign up, they get given bags to put the flexible plastic in, like branded bags, so that we add with a specific colour, so that we know they're linked to the Flex Collect scheme. They then get collected with your curbside waste, and the council sorts them, and then they get sent off for recycling. So yeah, it would be a separate recycling stream. It wouldn't be commingled.
Yeah.
Sorting flexibles is really tough.
Well, you maybe heard us talking about that we've got clients that are doing, mixed recycling, plastics, cans, etc. And there's a bit of a push in Scotland for some of the local authorities to put flexible plastics in. And the operators are saying, hang on a minute here, if you do that, we can't sort the stuff as well as we used to be able to. And there's a big issue.
Yeah, so I was just thinking I was just going to say, linked to that on the policy side, so the government then announced that as part of simpler recycling, we would have flexible collections from 2027. And that was a key thing that Flexible Plastic Fund was trying to achieve. So when we set up, our main goal was to get government to make collections mandatory. And so for them then to come out and say, yep, we're going to make them mandatory from 2027 because there's things like the Flexible Plastic Fund that have proved to us that they can be recycled. That was a massive achievement for us. So we were super proud of that. So assuming that carries on through simpler recycling under this new government, and assuming they keep that going, I'll be very excited to see that in place.
You move further north, James, and see if we can sort it out up here as well.
Yeah,
I can join Teams calls. I'm happy to help.
I was going to say, is it worth, just for the benefit of listeners, just talking a bit more about Ecosurety and what it actually does? And I know we've probably talked in previous podcasts about it, but it'd be quite nice for you to, you're very involved, obviously, as a former CEO. So probably.
And Ecosurety would be delighted for me to talk to you, because with the advent of this podcast, I forget to talk about Ecosurety. So I'm very excited that you've asked that question, and they'll be delighted. So
I think there are other options apart from Ecosurety, aren't there? I should maybe say that.
Of course, that's very political, yes. But I'll only mention Eco. You can mention the others if you want to. I'm an ex-salesman, I've got to keep my marketing head on. So Ecosurety works in producer responsibility. So historically and currently, the way producer responsibility works is whenever we buy a product. So if I was to go into a Sainsbury's and buy a bottle of water, that bottle of water has had a portion of its recycling paid for. That's the simplest way of putting it. And the way that works is they split it across the whole supply chain. So they look at the manufacturer, so the person who's creating the pellets that get turned into a bottle. They look at the person blowing the bottle or the company blowing the bottle. They look at the company that puts the water into the water bottle, and then they look at the company selling it. So in this example, you might have 4 companies along that supply chain to get me a bottle of water. So person making the pellet, blowing the bottle, putting the water in, and then selling it. So we, first of all, have to work out who on that supply chain holds liability. So who are those 4 companies, or is it just one company doing all of it? If you had like a farm shop or something, you might have somewhere where they get the packaging in, then they're putting the product into it and selling it at the same time. So they have multiple roles. So we would look at where the liability sits, and then we basically perform like a tax return like you would have with an accountant. So, we literally have to fill in a form that goes to the Environment Agency that says Sainsbury's sold this much paper, cardboard, aluminium, steel, plastic, wood, and then other corks and things like that. And we fill in this kind of return. It gets sent off to the agency. The agency then says, or SEPA in your example, the agency then says, this is how big Sainsbury's are, and this is how much evidence they have to buy to comply with the legislation. So we then go and say, okay, because company A sold, 1,000 tons of plastic, let's say, we will then go to a plastic recycler and say, can you recycle 1,000 tons on behalf of this company? We then buy that kind of evidence that recycling has taken place. So that's our historic and current business. We are moving into this world of extended producer responsibility, which is a bit different. And the way extended producer responsibility is going to work, hopefully, is it will, rather than it being a supply chain system, so it going across those 4 companies, it will just be the brand. So in Sainsbury's example, it will be their own brand products. But you'll also have like Nestle, Mars, the companies we've mentioned already. So there's the brand will take all the liability, 100% of it. It won't be split across the supply chain. And the other key difference is that rather than it being a piece of evidence, a piece of paper that says I recycled 1,000 tons, it will actually be our collection cost. So they are working out how much it costs to collect all the waste from all the households in the UK. And then they're going, okay, that's the total bill. Now we have to divide it amongst all these brands, and we will divide it in a number of ways. So we'll divide it based on market share, and we will divide it based on how recyclable their packaging is. So if you have a piece of packaging that's really recyclable and really easy to recycle and has a really clear collection stream, then it will be a lower cost than something that's harder to recycle and doesn't have as obvious a collection stream. So £2 billion is where the system is moving to. Right now, it's like anywhere between, when I started, it was quite low. I can't remember exactly what it was when I started, but certainly in the early days of my career, it was like 30 million to comply with this system. Last year, it's 600 million. So the costs have gone up. And then we're now moving to a system that's going to cost 2 billion because it's covering the cost of all of our waste collections from our home. And again, so the brands are now a bit like, okay, we've already seen the cost go from 30 million to 600 million. Now we're seeing it quadruple to 2 billion. What does that mean? How do I make my packaging more recyclable so that my bill is less? Which is a great conversation for them to be having. Hopefully that was clear.
Do you think they're ready? No, that was really
Normally
clear.
I get like an hour with a
James.
PowerPoint to go through it, but
No, that's you're only getting that. What was that? 2 minutes. That's all you're getting. I suppose a follow-up question, Brie. Do you think, are the producers ready for this? Do you think? And I suppose the other question to that is the other side of the industry, the people doing the collections, the recycling, are they ready for it, or do you think we've got a long way still to go?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, it's a really good question. See, I don't get to talk about this on my podcast. We don't really do questions like that. I like that I'm getting to talk to you about producer responsibility and EPR because, I don't have people ask me questions normally, so I like it. But that's a great question. I think in terms of the producers, they've kind of had they wouldn't say a slow build. They would say it's been jumped on. But a lot of the producers have had time to think about this. Now, that doesn't mean they're ready. That doesn't mean the system is ready, because this is a massive change. And they've had to change a lot of the data calculations, because we now have things, for example, instead of it just being paper, glass, aluminium, steel, plastic and wood, suddenly we've got fiber-based composites in there. So you're like, okay, that's a bit more complicated now. Now I've got to split my paper and plastic into fiber-based composites. So I've got to start thinking about coffee cups, for example, and things that have multiple layers in. So that's quite complicated. So suddenly the data is different, and the data you're collecting is different, because rather than just talking about plastic, we're suddenly saying, is it PET, HDPE, LDPE? You've talked about all the different types of plastic. So suddenly we've got to collect a load more data. So what's been happening is the data changes have already happened. So the producers are already reporting EPR data now. And the financial changes are coming in, I think, next year. I'm pretty confident that's true. So the financial changes are meant to come in next year. So there's kind of been this build to do the data for a couple of years, get used to that, and then we'll do the financials. I guess the slight challenge is we know that not everyone is doing their data. We know that there are gaps. So it's now up to the EA and DEFRA to really push to close those gaps and get everyone used to doing this data. Because they sort of started with it being do your data voluntarily, and now it's do your data and it's mandatory, and then it will be do your data and you're financially paying for it. And you've got to kind of slowly get to that point where everyone's doing it. But it's really important that there's someone policing the system to check that actually we're on our way to 100% of producers doing it. Otherwise, if you have like 20% of producers not doing their data, then obviously it's unfair on the 80% who have and are now picking up a bigger bill. So that's the producer side of it. In terms of the recycler side, so there's a couple of things here. So they're retaining the system that I've talked to you about a minute ago. So they're retaining that, we call it the PRN system, this evidence-based system. They are retaining, so the recyclers will continue to get that income stream. So that shouldn't be too much of a change for the recyclers. I think it's the local authorities who are particularly worried about EPR, because obviously they're going from a system where they have full control of their collections, finances, to a system where they're going to get paid for it, which I would think, oh, that's a great thing. Suddenly it's, it's not coming out of council tax, I'm getting paid for it. But I think when you then combine that with simpler recycling, and you say to some of these local authorities who maybe don't collect glass or don't collect food waste, okay, you have to now collect those things, and don't worry about it, we're going to pay for your packaging over here with this system. That's quite a lot for a local authority to go through in terms of changes. And I think the concern for them is going through those changes as fast as they're having to go through them. Certainly when I spoke
local
about
authorities are... I don't think local authorities are used to doing things fast, are they?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And we talked about EPR on our podcast a few weeks ago, and I got some messages from local authorities going, we're not happy about this. So I got that sentiment. I got that sentiment just from that, because we were probably quite positive about EPR, because I see it as a householder, like if I ignore all the operational barriers and challenges, which luckily I can do because I'm not actually a recycler. If I ignore all the operational challenges, it sounds great. Suddenly we've got a system where we're going to get proper funding for recycling, and we're going to have legislation that says you have to collect these things. So no longer will you go on holiday and find that the place you've gone on holiday to has a completely different bin, completely different infrastructure. Everyone's got the same. And so to me, that's really good. Obviously, to everyone else, that's like, you get the media saying we're going to have 7 bins. You get the media, saying all these things that are like, that's not true. And even if it was true, you could definitely look at that in a positive light rather than just we're going to chuck everything in the same bin.
Can we add that's England? That's not Scotland.
Yeah, true.
We still have our 28 bins.
Well, we have that. I think we have 7 in Bristol, to be honest. So I'm already there, but
I quite
I've
like my
got
bins.
7 as well. I like my 7 bins.
Quite like my bins. So going back to our questions now, and back to what you said before about now you can tell me what was the worst job you've had.
Yeah, I was trying to think about whether to tell this story or not, but I think it is quite funny. I won't name them, and I might, by the time this goes out, delete them on my LinkedIn. Who knows? I might not, but yeah, no, it was really interesting because when I graduated, I wanted a role to make a difference in the environment, and I found this company that was doing quite a lot of scientific stuff. So they were doing, they sort of said they were like the Amazon for scientific equipment. You want to buy an electron microscope, you go to them. And I was very interested in like marketing and sales. I'd already had this grand plan that I was going to graduate and travel the world, and I was like, to travel the world, I need money. Think salespeople get money. I sort of had this like, diagram on my wall of like, get a sales job, make loads of money, go traveling. That was my plan. And then become a teacher. That was actually the fourth part of the plan. So anyway, none of that.
Okay.
I mean, some of it's happened, but I went traveling. But
everything seems to happen apart from the becoming a teacher.
yeah, but that's what I think I'm doing now. That's what the podcast is, become a teacher.
So be the podcast. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's what I'm doing now. But you are right. Like that is the gap. So, and I did really enjoy sales. But so I joined this company as a marketing like assistant, helping them design like banners for websites and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting. And I joined them and they offered me a salary that was very, very low. I won't disclose it, but it was very low. And I said, after a year, I'd really like a better salary, and this is the salary I'd like, and I'll work really hard to get to this salary because this is what I think I'm worth. And I would say the salary I was asking for was like a normal graduate entry level salary. So like I'd give them a year basically on the cheap and hopefully get a better salary at the end of it. That was the plan. And so I worked really hard, and I put my all in. I had clients writing in saying, you're doing an amazing job for us and all this kind of stuff. And I took that all to my year review and I said, right, I'm ready for that salary now. And they said, sorry, we don't think you're worth that. We're going to offer you this. And it was a much lower amount. And so I said, oh, right, okay, well, I think I'm going to quit then. And I went downstairs. This is genuinely what happened. I said, okay, I think I'm going to quit. I went downstairs and there was an email in my email inbox from a graduate recruitment company that I signed up to. And it said, Budget Pack of recruiting, do you want a job at Budget Pack? And I went, oh, well, that'll do. And so I applied and that's what happened. And so the funny part of this story, so the bit that gets really funny is, so this all happened. So I applied for the job at what is now Ecosurety, joined, on this graduate role, having quit this job where they told me I wasn't worth a basic salary. And I left. And then a few years later, I was lucky enough. So in 2012, I think I became the commercial director for Ecosurety. So I joined the board, became the commercial director. So 3 years later. And my CEO at the time couldn't go to a director's dinner that was happening. So he said, oh, would you go in my place? So I said, yes, of course. So I went along and of course I'm sat next to the guy who 3 years earlier had told me I wasn't worth this basic salary. And so he said, oh, what are you doing now? And I said, oh, I've just been made commercial director and joined the board of the company I'm on. And, they thought I was worth significantly more than you thought I was worth. And this is the kind of leader this person is. He turned around to everyone at the table and went, see, I taught him everything he knows.
No.
I remember going out that dinner thinking, I will never be that kind of leader. And so when I was made CEO...
I thought you were going to swear then, James.
No. I've told, I'm disciplined on this story. I've told it a few times. But I remember leaving that thinking, I am going to be this kind of leader if I ever become CEO. So when 3 years later, I was lucky enough to be offered that job, I was very clear about how I was going to manage and lead. And I won't give you all the horror stories, but it was very different to how that person managed and led. So yes, it was... I will delete it from my LinkedIn before this episode goes out because I'm scared.
I think that's a good sort of story about, learning by other people's mistakes. It's you can see what you don't want to do, how you don't want to lead, and that's it's all about experiences, isn't it? And how you get experiences throughout your working life and your working career.
Yes, definitely true.
So thinking back to that time, obviously, James, you've got your book, you've got your podcast, you're really engaged in the waste and resource sector. Do you think your views, your opinions, your habits have changed as you've come through your career? Do you think initially were you a bit naive about waste and what was happening, or Were you always quite up to speed?
I definitely didn't understand it as a graduate. So yes, I have changed a lot. And I think it was funny actually, because when I started going out with my now wife, she went to the same university I did. So she went to Exeter like a little bit after I did. And so I had to go back to the university that I'd left to visit her. And her housemates were really rubbish at recycling. And it was amazing. It was amazing which was fascinating because they all were studying, biology. They won't mind me admitting that. They all knew they were rubbish, and it was amazing because they all cared, but they were really rubbish at recycling. It was awful. And it was so funny watching, the James that had gone to university a few years prior who did not care, and the James that was coming back to the same university to one of these student houses going, guys, we need to sort all the, rip that off the pizza box and sort this out with the foil and all that stuff. And suddenly you realise how like wacky you've become. And ultimately that's what led me to write the book as well, because I was we were having a drink with my brother-in-law and we were just having a bottle of beer, and he went to put the bottle cap in with the metal recycling, and I said, oh, don't do that, it's too small, just chuck it back on the bottle and the glass recyclers will deal with it. And he was like, what? Someone should write a book about this, which is why I wrote the book. So yeah, I think I've obviously learned a lot since joining as a graduate, since kind of going from that, definitely caring about the planet and making it better, but not understanding the world of recycling, to now having a good understanding of the world of recycling and wanting to now share those stories and impart that to others. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do now.
We normally ask guests, but I pretty much know the answer here, how we engage with the public more and change behaviours, because that's the bit we've struggled for a long time in the waste sector, isn't it?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I do think, as I said, I think telling stories is really important and making them fun and funny and enjoyable. And, I love that we've both got podcasts as a forum to do that, because it's such a great medium to just have a chat and then put that chat out and hope people listen to it. I love that. And if you can make it exciting and interesting or just something people enjoy. I mean, I love listening to your podcast as I just go for my morning walk. I just, put it on, and there's something really nice about just listening to whichever guest you've got on and getting their experience. I can't describe why I like it. It's just quite soothing, I think, as you're just going for your morning walk to listen to a chat that people are having about whatever it is you want to listen to. So I think podcasts are a great medium for us to...
I was going to say, we should maybe sell it for people trying to get to sleep at night or something. Maybe.
Yeah, Robbie and I did talk about us becoming a podcast people fall asleep to, but then we realised we just laugh way too much. Like everyone would just be jumping up awake midway through a loud laugh. But I do think there's loads we can do for consumers. I think at the moment, the scrutiny now is, there is, from my perspective, there is a difference between, as you will know, there's a difference between collection and recycling. And that is quite complicated, because you want your collection message to be as simple as possible so that everyone can understand it. But what you can then recycle and what is complex to recycle is quite challenging at the other end. And so if you get that messaging wrong, or, you're trying to merge those messages, then that's where that can come under that kind of greenwashing scrutiny, where people say, well, hang on a sec, I've put this in the right bin and you're telling me it's not recycled. It's like, well, those are different things. Ultimately, we've got to make the collection messaging simple and put all the work back to the recycler to sort it and generate what they can out of it, and recognise that some of that might get incinerated, and we should be honest about that and open. And I think that's maybe where we fall over at the moment, because we've gone quite simple on the collection messaging and haven't really then told the story of what things become and where they end up and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a big opportunity. So for me, if I was going to improve education, that's where I'd be focusing my time.
Do you think one of the ones I've wondered about is, with the extended producer responsibility coming out, do you think the big producers are going to start taking a bit more ownership of this and starting to drive, a lot of these companies have got pretty big budgets in terms of marketing and so on, diverting some of that budget towards material use and recycling and stuff would be pretty effective, I would think. If
I do.
Had the will to do it.
Yeah, I do think they will. And I think what is likely to happen, and again, I'm not saying this with any knowledge, because my role in Ecosurety is very different now. So it's not like a brand has told me this. It's just my feeling is, if I was a brand and I was suddenly paying a lot into the EPR pot, then I would care about what local authorities are collecting. So if your local authority, for example, didn't meet the requirements of simpler recycling and didn't collect all the stuff, you'd be thinking, well, hang on a sec, I'm paying for this. So I think brands will care a lot about all local authorities engaging with simpler recycling and all local authorities collecting in a joined up way. Now, if we get that right, then we have a huge opportunity to do mass communications, because suddenly it's not, like I'll give you an example. I was doing some research for the podcast with food waste, and I was looking at I think it was Epsom Council's what to line your food waste bin with. And they were like, don't use a compostable bag, only use a normal plastic carrier bag, right? Which goes against everything I know.
Don't start me in that one, James.
Yeah.
That's a whole podcast in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will turn it into one. But so there's Epsom, and I know Bristol is compostable, don't use plastic. And I'm like, well, so you can't do a communication campaign. Your communication campaign has to be geolocated to be like, who's the, I need this message to go to Bristol and Bristol only because everyone else is different. And so I think if I was a brand, what I'd be doing is saying, right, we need to make sure that we're focused on every council collecting the same, so that we can then do those mass communications that you're referring to.
I think that's what's frustrating in Scotland, is you've got, well, I suppose it's the same down in England as well. You've got so many different councils doing so many different things, different colours and on whatever. And I do like is the fact that there are different bins, and people are focusing. They do have food waste bins. Whether people use them or not is a different matter, but there is that opportunity there. And we do loads of waste composition analysis, and the amount of food waste you find in residual waste is just shocking, even with food waste collection. So yeah, I think from my point of view, I think food waste is quite a big thing to focus on. And if you've got a separate food waste bin and a separate, and you're actually cleaning your waste and you're actually seeing it separated, you actually see how much waste you're producing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
there's more
That is a
thought
big
there
thing.
of, let's reduce it.
Yeah, that is a big thing.
It's trying to
Food waste.
put it again, is trying to think, yes, recycling is good, but actually not producing the waste in the first place is that's where we've got to get to. And people think because they're recycling, they're doing a great job, but actually they probably didn't need to buy what they've bought and put in the recycling bin in the first place. But anyway, that's a whole different story. I can go on hobby horses all the time, but anyway, Alison, next question.
Moving on, that's why we've got a question list to keep us on track here, June. Moving on, you're obviously very busy work-wise with your books, your podcasts, your day job, or your various day jobs. How do you get away from it all? How do you relax? You're going to tell us you're a singer or a drummer or something?
No, I play the piano, but this is my hidden shame is my plastic that I have in my house. I have a lot of plastic in my house because I collect Lego. So I have a lot of Lego. And it's confession time, right? I haven't even confessed to this on my podcast yet. We're going too soon. But I'll confess it to you. But this is an exclusive rubbish talk confession.
There we go. An exclusive.
Lots of little plastic boxes.
I have a lot of Lego, yeah. So that is my...
Is that kits of Lego, or is it kits of Lego, or is it just Lego?
No, I'm very methodical. So I buy the sets, build them, and then they get displayed. And so my house is just full of it. And my wife is very good at saying you're only allowed it in these spaces. And then obviously they get full, and then I'm like, oh, it's found its way over here, because I'm not allowed it in the kitchen.
Do you do that?
Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah, do you do that technical Lego where you can have little motors and things and cars, and they can go all over the place?
Occasionally. It's not really. I'm more about the non-technical sets. I do have some technic sets, but I'm more about buildings and architecture and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, but I find it incredibly relaxing.
Some photos of these.
We need some photos. We need some photos for the newsletter.
I don't think my confession can stretch as far as people realizing how much Lego I actually have. Guys, this is you're underestimating how much is in my house.
Is it a few rooms full? Is that what
It's and quite a few cupboards and drawers, and it's not great.
Oh my God, this is an obsession, James. You do realise obsession?
Yeah.
We did actually talk about Lego. Was Lego not trying to do a recycled version, and then they pulled the plug on it or something? They
Well,
couldn't
this
get
is a
the.
Gave up in
spoil.
the end,
Well,
didn't
no,
they?
yeah, but this is great because this is a spoiler for an episode that I want to do because I actually when that news story came out, I ended up getting interviewed by the Telegraph, I think, and the Telegraph had like
Right. Okay.
their readership typically don't really mind that Lego aren't using recycle. I don't know if that's fair, but that's kind of how I perceive certainly the interview I had with the reporter. She was like, what's the good news story here? And ultimately there is a good news story because Lego's fascinating. So they wanted to put rPET in their bricks. So they wanted to use recycled PET in their bricks. And if you think about what that actually means, a ton of Lego, and I haven't done the numbers because I haven't prepared my episode on this, but a ton of Lego is worth a huge amount of money. And they could suddenly take all of the rPET that currently goes into bottles, and goes into our packaging and lock it away and have it on our shelves. And while in principle that sounds like an okay thing, actually that would stop it being recycled and reused. And I guess I would much rather that a bottle was turned into a bottle over and over again than something was turned into a toy that then sat on my shelf. I think ultimately that single-use plastic is probably the least single use of all the plastics because I'm going to have it for my lifetime and then I'm going to pass it on. So I don't think we should be locking recycled plastic into that. Now, at the same time, Lego were talking about making particularly their tree parts out of bioplastic. So all of their, as far as I know, all their tree, if you're making a tree and they've got leaves and branches and stuff, those are all bioplastic, which is quite nice. Now, that's different. I think they should make their parts out of bioplastic if they can get the strength, because that's just about the source of the plastic. And so that's a renewable source. But should they be taking plastic that could be used in packaging and could go through several cycles, that's where I start thinking, actually, in isolation, it sounds bad that they've stopped doing it. But if you look at the whole supply chain, it's probably not a bad thing, because it would mean that people like Coca-Cola wouldn't be able to put rPET in their bottles.
That's an interesting take
Sure.
on the
Well,
Lego conundrum.
we'll wait with bated breath for that episode, James.
I'm slightly
Yeah,
worried it's just because I'm
pointing it
very
out,
forgiving. Maybe I'm
absolutely.
just very forgiving of the Lego company, but hopefully people listening are thinking, I don't know, yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
that's a good point. So back to your current role and what you're trying to achieve. What's next for you in your career? Where do you see yourself going from here, James? Because you're only young.
Thank you. I get older every day. No,
Really?
I graduated in 2009, so I think that makes me like 37. I think if we worked it out, I'm at that age where I'm starting to
So
forget.
still
Depending on who I talk to, I say 36 or 38, but I think I'm 37. And yeah, I've got loads that I want to do. I've got loads of ideas, and to be honest, the projects I'm starting and developing now are really exciting. So I sort of touched on them. I'm very interested in how we make refill work, because I think I've been so focused on recycling for so long, and actually refill's really exciting. And, how do we get consumers to be using packaging over and over again? So that's that's a tough nut to crack. So trying to make that work is really exciting. I like difficult challenges. And as I say, I'm doing some stuff with a building in Bristol as well, which is really exciting. And that's kind of like, how do you make buildings sustainable? So it's just slightly bringing me out of my comfort zone, which is very much recycling, into other areas, which I'm really enjoying.
The refill side of it is interesting because how do you make that mainstream? How do you make
Are
it
you asking
such
me?
that?
I can't give you an answer. I haven't finished my research yet.
No, I'm rhetorical. It's a rhetorical question, James. It's how you make that mainstream, how you get Mrs. McDonald from up the road to take her milk jug in with her, or a refillable flour packet, or a bit of pasta container to go in and say, right, okay, I want you to fill these for me. Then I don't need any packaging. I need to just go in, and she's going into Sainsbury's or Aldi or whatever where she does her normal shopping. I mean, it could be Mr. McDonald, obviously. I don't want to be gender specific, but it is that interesting that question and how we get that.
And ultimately,
Anyway, that
we
was
can
a
look at
rhetorical
I mean,
That's-
ultimately, I can give you a bit of an answer because ultimately we can look at the schemes that are starting to work now that are really exciting. So, if you look at like Ocado, they've just developed pasta and rice plastic pots. And the key to making these a success, really, the key that they've identified is you've got to make the packaging really ugly. Because all the schemes so far make the packaging really pretty, and then everyone goes, "Oh, I'll keep that. That's really nice. I'll use that on my side." And actually, that's useless. You've got to get it back. So you've got to make. So Ocado have deliberately gone down this route of. They told me it was fugly, so functionally ugly, because they want it back. They've also developed in these pasta and rice things. I think they hold like 3 kilos of pasta, which means consumers don't have to interact with it very much. You know, it's going to take me personally a long time to get through 3 kilos of pasta. So you've got this situation where if you combine those two things, where you make the packaging like not that exciting so that people return it and they don't have to engage with it very often, then I think that's how you start doing it. It's when you've got packaging that someone needs to replace once a week that they're going to go, I'll go for the easier option.
Yeah. No, that's true.
As somebody explained to me recently, James, that there's almost a step before this as well. There's almost a step to use what's actually in your house before you go and buy something new.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got
Because
to
there's
go up
loads
that
of
way.
us with loads of
Yeah. Got to go up the waste hierarchy,
cleanup
right?
products and all sorts. Yeah.
Well, it's when you get at the back of your cupboard and you find out you haven't used this thing since 2020 or something like that, and you're like, well, I wonder if I can still use it. Would it be all right? And then you realise that perhaps not. What about next one, James? Is one fact you want to share from your job or sector which you think people may not know? Now, you've got to beat the 98% air and the 2% product from the polyester from John Rennie the other week, but I'm sure you can come up with something.
Oh, I don't know. That was a good one. And I've given lots of facts already. Do I have any left? I think
Well, you can use one of the
you can
facts you've
repeat.
already done. You can.
Well, I think for me, the one that I really like talking about, this was before flexible plastic was like collected at supermarkets widely. Supermarkets used to have all the carrier bag recycling points, and often they still do. And the big one for me that I used to tell people was they can accept anything that's LDPE. So rather than just carrier bags, if it's got LDPE, you can put it in the carrier bag recycling point. So obviously more supermarkets now collect all flexible plastics. But if you've got one near you that doesn't, may only collect carrier bags, you can put any LDP in there and it'll get recycled. And then linked to that, I had this idea, which I've talked about and I think is quite good, because people often talk about, well, how am I going to store that LDP? How am I going to collect up my flexibles? So what I do is I take my bread bag, loaf of bread once a week, take my bread bag, fill it with LDPE and take it back to the supermarket. And then you have a bread bag once a week, you've got a free recycling bag. So that's probably my
Fair
most
enough.
interesting thing I could share that I haven't talked about already.
Yeah,
That
one
sounds
of
excellent. So we're going to give you a chance to share your favourite piece of slang or dialect or expression that you regularly find yourself using that some listeners from other parts of the countries may not understand.
I was going to do some Bristol specific ones here because I don't regularly use them though. I've noticed I regularly say like, I appear to, when you've got a podcast, you listen back to it and you go, oh, I say that all the time. So I always start sentences with the word so, and I always say, I know. And I'm telling people this now. So when they listen to our podcast, all they'll do is hear that, I know and so. It's like, so, but they're not very interesting because they're not regional specific. So I'll give you a couple of Bristol ones. So we have a phrase is Gert Lush for it's like really good. Have you ever heard that before?
Say
Like,
that again, James?
Gert Lush, if something's really good.
Oh, Gert Lush. Okay.
Gert Lush.
Oh,
Ever
okay.
heard that? No.
Not heard
One to
that
me.
one.
I've heard
Okay.
lush before. I've heard lush.
Yeah. So
sound to
lush
something
and then
really
Gert. I
good.
don't really know what Gert means, but I guess it's maybe like very lush. So yeah, lush as in your normal spelling, and then Gert is Gert. So people say that a lot in Bristol.
Gert Lush.
Gert Lush. And you say it like Gert Lush, like in your Bristolian accent. And then when you get off the bus, you say cheers drive. That's what they all say. Cheers drive. So I
Okay.
can't,
Yeah.
I'm not very good at
Okay,
the
yeah,
accents, but those are the two Bristol ones that everyone says down here.
Brilliant. No, I like these.
Mhm.
So, second last question for you. I'm going to give you a magic wand to sort something out in the big bad world of waste management. What would you like to use it for?
I will be semi-controversial here and say I think that one of the things that has frustrated me for many years and continues to frustrate me is this anti-plastic, rhetoric that is happening. And I think the reality
Plastic's
is
bad. And,
yeah, and the problem with saying plastic's bad is you automatically make everything better. So like I've lost a number of times that I've gone into a bar and they've given me a paper straw and they've said it's environmentally friendly because it's made of paper. It's like, yeah, but I didn't need a straw. So like, because you've said the plastic straw's bad, everyone's decided the paper straw's okay. And that's quite weird. And that happens a lot, doesn't it? And we do it as consumers. If you think about it, we're like, oh, this must be better because it's not plastic. And if you do that, then you create this kind of permission for all the other stuff. And I think for me, it's like, I'm packaging agnostic. I couldn't care less what my stuff comes in, as long as it's the best packaging for the product and I've got a route to recycle. So, I'm constantly trying to work out what the best packaging for a product is because there is no such thing, and I always say if there was a perfect piece of packaging, then Tesco would be telling everyone to use it, right? So the fact that we go into Tesco and there's loads and loads of packaging means there's no perfect packaging because they could decide what everyone uses. They're big enough to decide what everyone uses. And so the fact that they don't means nothing's perfect. And glass is heavy, aluminium's light.
I've thought
Plastic's lighter, it's really complicated. But so I would be definitely going on this. Let's work out what the best packaging is. And then let's work out how to recycle it. And then let's make everything made out of that. So if we decide that drinks should always be plastic bottles instead of an aluminium can or a glass bottle, let's just always make them plastic bottles. And then we can really improve the collection and recycling. So I would like category specific kind of ideal packaging, basically.
It's almost going the other way, so James, at the moment, and there's people making all sorts of composite packaging and drinks bottles that are paper and
it is a key.
It's almost going the reverse rather than.
That's right. It's a key problem in the industry. That the trouble is when we've done all these stories about how bad plastic is, that then leads to a ramp up of innovation, which is great. In every other industry, innovation's great. So you say, hey, there's a problem with this thing, and everyone goes and innovates, and we eventually land on the thing that replaces it, that fixes that problem. The challenge is when you talk about packaging, because people want a brand edge in their packaging and they want to have the best thing, the innovations go far and wide, and they just go, you end up with too much innovation. So we end up with too many packaging types and no one knows what to do with any of it. So you're absolutely right that, I'd like to see a reversal of that and say, look, this is the best packaging to use. And hey, if we have a version that is a bioplastic or it's made of seaweed or whatever it is, that's better than this oil-based one, but it's still plastic. I think the other thing that winds me up is this like bioplastics, and then they'll tag it not plastic. And it's like, well, it is. It's just got a different source. It's like saying, what was I thinking the other day? Well, yeah, I was writing the other day. I wrote a line that I'm going to use. So you'll hear this in my podcast too, sorry. But I wrote this line that was like, it's like saying solar electricity isn't electricity, right? It's like saying the only electricity is the stuff that comes from coal. It's like, no, the source of it doesn't then dictate what it is when it gets to me as a consumer. And with plastic, we have this weird thing where like the source we seem to only accept that oil-based plastic is plastic. And actually, there's a massive variety of sources of plastic, and all of that is plastic. And we certainly wouldn't be doing that with anything else in our lives. So I don't really know why we allow it in plastic. But hey, there you go.
So last question, James. We've asked all our questions and this is the last one. So what advice would you give to somebody coming up through in the younger generation wanting to do what you're doing or be where you are in this particular time? What would you say to them? What advice would you give them?
What would I do? So for me, what I tell people, because I have lots of friends who joined big companies, joined brands basically that you would know, and they've enjoyed working up through the ranks of those brands. But ultimately, I've had a lot more fun working for a small company. So if you ask me, my personal view, would join a really small company and be like employee number 4 or 5, and then go, how do I transform this company so that it grows really rapidly? And then rather than big employee 4 or 5, we'll have like 30 employees and I'll be, one of the first. And so for me, what I did, and it's easier said than done, of course, was join a very small company as employee number 7, and then tried to find ways to sell the product into much bigger organizations and grow the company and develop our product so that we got more things. And ultimately that gave me huge amounts of opportunity to join the board very early, to become CEO very early, to then become a shareholder. It gave me huge opportunity to kind of hone those skills, practice my leadership, develop my style without getting bogged down in the, the other things my friends have, which is the democracy of a big company, and the politics of a big company, which are extremely complicated, where everyone's fighting for everything. So, I'm not saying joining a big company is bad. I'm just giving you my personal view that if I was giving advice to a graduate, I'd say go and find a really cool, not necessarily startup, but a really cool company that looks like they're doing something great in the space that you can develop and grow.
Yeah, and make a difference too, and hard work as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Not be afraid of a bit of hard work and going out there and getting it, by the sounds of things.
I think that's great advice, James. Thank you very much. So we've exhausted all our questions. Hopefully that wasn't too painful to be in the other side of the microphone, if you like.
The hot seat.
I loved it.
We will.
Thanks for having me.
We'll obviously share your Talking Rubbish episode or your links to them. If people haven't listened, it's very much definitely worth a listen. You appear to cover a different topic every week or numerous topics every week, but all very topical in the waste game. So thank you very much from myself and Jane.
Yeah, thank you, James. I need to say that I do like your little jingles in the middle, though, of your podcast. I'm listening to think that's quite cool. Quite like that bit.
Well, I can tell you a story about the jingle. I've got a story about everything, but the jingles, originally, I found a jingle I really liked and I paid for the license for it. And then our producer then cut our first episode and was like, this jingle's awful. It's way too corporate. So he was like, you need to find a better one. I was like, I've already paid for this one. So I've actually got a backup. I've got a spare jingle if you want it, but I think it's too corporate for you guys too. But I've got the license to this jingle I'm not using, and I've ended up with this very jazzy, I love it. Yeah, very jazzy, like 70s, 80s number. I think it's great. But yeah, I paid for a completely different jingle to start with.
You're way ahead of us, James, having a producer. You're miles ahead of us. Interesting. I know I've talked to you before about this, but is it worth explaining to listeners, where the money, as I understand from the sale of the book, you've sort of, if you like, reinvested a little bit in the podcast?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, basically, I got some money from selling the book, and also I did some talks while I was traveling, actually, which was amazing because I got to prepare presentations while I was on long train journeys and then deliver the talk from a hotel room. And it was like, hey, this is helping reimburse some of this travel cost. And I left it all in a company I'd set up just to manage kind of my rubbish work, basically. And then, yeah, I thought, actually, rather than taking that out, I want to reinvest it. And so for me, when I decided I was going to do a podcast, which was, where are we? We've been going for 2 months now, and it was literally 2 weeks from I'm doing it to recording. So 2.5 months ago, I knew that for me, the key was getting the audio quality right straight away, because the biggest thing with podcasts is people, listening and getting them to stay listening. They need to be very clear on the audio. So for me, I was like, I'm going to just reinvest that money in getting my audio as clear as I possibly can. So we bought a couple of mics, and we found this producer in Bristol who's really helped us, and he's helped us to grow it as well, which has been amazing. And yeah, I'm just we'll see what happens in a year's time when the funding disappears. Hopefully by then we'll be in a position where we've learned how to make it more efficient, and also maybe we've got something coming back that we can then reinvest back in. But yes, I have agreed, a year up front to try and to commit myself to at least 52 episodes, because we're doing them weekly.
You'll be catching up with us. When's this? This is episode 47 for us. So you'll be catching up.
In like a year or so, I'll catch up. But yeah, it'll take me a long time.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed that.
Yeah,
thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, James.